Hi, I'm Brion Toss. I'm a rigger in Port Townsend, Washington. The term sailor's fancy rope work has been applied to just about every knot more complicated than a bowline. Traditionally, it's reserved for particularly challenging configurations that blend a decorative appearance with a practical purpose. Thus, you might have rope buttons, which are very involved in interesting shape and texture and complexity, but on a smaller scale than this one, can actually function as usable clothing buttons. Or you might have Turk's heads, which we'll be making a little bit later, an endless circular braid, just a cosmic knot, and beautiful just by itself, but which can be applied to use as a slide, or as a chafe protection, or just to bridge a gap in other rope work. And you might have hitches, something to cover a lengthwise object, a cylindrical object, for a better grip or for comfort, to insulate against heat and cold, as well as providing, again, a handsome appearance. So fancy rope work is a very, very wide field. There's literally thousands of knots in it. Today I'm going to show you some basic configurations that can act as building blocks for other knots if you want to follow up, or can stand on their own as a basic working vocabulary for fancy rope work. First, a button knot that you can actually use for clothing buttons on a smaller scale than the one we'll show you. Hitches to cover cylindrical objects for handholds, and that wonderful circular braid, the Turk's head. First, the button knot. We're going to start with a 4-strand button knot. But to make a button, you have to have button loops. And you want to hold the loops in place while you're tying the knot. So the first knot you learn isn't the fancy work. It's a strictly utilitarian knot called a constrictor that we'll put right here to seize the button loops in place. If you're using large-scale line like this, a piece of flag halyard will work just fine. For smaller, finer material, you can use a piece of sail twine. No matter what material you're using, to tie the constrictor, first make a loop. Line goes up, back across itself. Mentally divide the loop vertically in half. You'll see that this half of the loop is in front, and this half of the loop is behind. Hold the part that's behind right where it is. Turn the other hand over and fold the front half behind, making this figure 8 shape. To finish the knot, just put the two parts of the figure 8 together, and then you put the constrictee into the hole they form. Once again, make a loop, hold the back half in place, turn the other hand over, fold the front half down to make a figure 8. Put the two parts of that figure 8 together. Put the constrictee into the hole they form. As you can see, the constrictor knot is just an overhand knot, like you use to start tying your shoes, with a turn on top of it. As you pull it tighter, the overhand knot tightens, and the turn keeps it from loosening again. You put this on, pull as hard as you can, and you can use it as a temporary seizing, not just for fancy work, like we're doing today, but for emergency hose clamps, temporary whippings on ropes, hundreds of other uses. But back to the button. Middle the line you're using. For rope this size, a typical button might need about 4 feet of length in each piece. For smaller rope, less length. Middle it to form your 2 button loops, and then put your constrictor knot over the loops. You can adjust the length of the loops. Usually they're quite short because you want to sew them onto clothing or as lanyards. Locate the constrictor where you want it, and then pull it tight, just as tight as you can. Then you can cut the ends flush. Great, we're ready to start tying. Arrange the ends petal-like. The first part of this knot is called a wall knot. It's one of the fundamental building blocks of fancy rope work. Take any end and pass it counterclockwise under the end next to it and up out of the way. Take the next end, the one you just went under, pass it under its neighbor counterclockwise and up out of the way. Take the next end, pass it under its neighbor and up out of the way. Finally, take the fourth end, pass it up through the first loop, and you have a wall knot. It should look regular and clover-like. Once again, the wall knot. Arrange it flower petal-like. Take any end under its neighbor. That neighbor goes under its neighbor. That neighbor goes under its neighbor. And finally, the last one comes up through the first one. The wall knot. Next step is called a crown knot. It's just an inverted version of the wall. You take any end, pass it over its neighbor and down. You can use your bottom hand to hold it against the button loops to keep it out of the way so you don't confuse it with the others. Take the one you just went over and go over its neighbor and down. The third one goes over its neighbor and down. And finally, the fourth one goes under the loop made by the first one, goes right through it and down. Once again for the crown knot. Get the wall knot regular and fair. Take any end, pass it over its neighbor, hold it down. The next end, over its neighbor, hold it down. The next end, over its neighbor, and down. And finally, the fourth one goes through the loop formed by the first one. You can tie wall and crown with 3, 4, 5, 6, most any number of strands. And an easy way to remember them is you wall up and you crown down. So here we have a wall and crown combination. Make sure you can see the wall, and in the middle of it, the crown before you go further. Also make sure that each strand from the crown is resting on the first part of the wall it comes to. Not like this up on the second wall, but down here on the first wall. All of them are down where they belong. The next step in this button is to pass each end up through the next wall ahead of the next strand. Here's the wall we're on. Here's the next wall. Here's the next strand. Each end goes up through the next wall ahead of the next strand and out of the way. And the next end, the one you just went ahead of, goes up through the next wall ahead of the next strand and out of the way. The third one, make sure you can see its wall. We're here, it's there, goes up through the next wall ahead of the next strand. Now the last one, there's no end hanging out for reference point. So just find what wall you're on, which in this case is right here. And here's the next wall. And here's where the next strand would be if we hadn't tucked it. So this end goes up through the next wall ahead of the next strand. All right, we'll review that part. We're back to the wall and crown. Here's the wall, here's the crown. Each of the ends is sitting on the first wall it comes to, not up on the second one, down on the first one. Take any end, pass it up through the next wall, ahead of the next strand, and up out of the way. Through the next wall and ahead, through the next wall and ahead. And when you get to that weird fourth one, find the wall you're on, find the next wall, and then right ahead of that, that's where the end would be if we hadn't tucked it. So the strand you want goes up through that wall, ahead of that strand. Stop and fair again. Make sure everything looks as neat as you can get it. One more step. Look into the middle of the knot. You'll see the 4 legs that come up from the button loop. Take any end and tuck it, like all the other moves, counterclockwise, into the space past the second end. So here I am coming up here. Here's the first end. Here's the second end. I go into the space past the second end and hold it down. Take the next strand and put it into the next space. The next strand into the next space, right into the middle, right, tucking it down to the stem. The last strand goes into the last open space. Make sure that each strand goes into its own space. That is the knot. That is the easy part. Now you have to draw it up so it comes down compact and solid to make a usable button. To do that, turn the knot sideways. You'll see a series of diagonal lines forming a pattern around the rim of the knot. Every other one of those goes to the stem, to the constrictor, and the other one goes across the top of the knot. So pull on one, say this one, and you'll see that it goes across the top of the knot. That means that this one next to it goes to the stem. You want to start with one of these that goes to the stem, to the constrictor. Take it and pull to get any slack taken up against the constrictor knot. And then follow it up under 2 parts, and it emerges on top of the knot. Pull the slack up onto the top of the knot, just gently, just enough to get a little initial slack out. Follow it again under 2 parts until it comes out on the side of the knot. Pull out the slack out onto the side. Under 2 more parts, it comes up on the top, this time on the inside on the top. Just pull down most of the slack. Come back down to the next one that goes to the constrictor. Take the slack up, work it up on top, down to the side, up under 2 parts on the top, and then take that slack just gently down, not too tight. Take the next part that goes to the stem, up, down, up, and down. That leaves one last little bit hanging out we haven't drawn up yet. Take the slack up against the constrictor, up under 2 parts to the top, down under 2 parts to the side, up under 2 parts to the top, and down. That's the first go-around, and you should be able to see a pattern now. These doubled parts on the top of the knot and the little diagonal parts on the side. Start again. Any knot, any part that goes to the constrictor, this time pull a little firmer. You want to avoid taking up too much at once. Just gradually work the knot down over several phases of drawing up. You can leave the last bit hanging out a little bit. To find the next one, You come straight down and then back a couple. Down, up, down, up, and take a little slack down. Okay, this is the one we just tightened. Straight down, back a couple, that's the next one. Down, up, under 2 parts, the next, and up, and you want to know where this goes to down here, pull up, see what moves, pull down, but not too far, otherwise you tend to implode the knot. We just did that one, straight down, back a couple, here's the last one, pull against the constrictor, under 2 parts and up, on the outside of the top, down, under 2 parts, and up, under 2 parts, and where is it? There it is, pull down. Now just stop and fair things, pull those tops a little bit snugger, and now it looks more like a button, almost fair. It's gradually taking shape. For the final phase, you'll want to use a tool like a small awl. Dull the tip a little bit so you don't draw blood if you poke yourself too readily. And use this tool to finish the drawing up. You're going to be encountering more resistance because as this gets smaller, there's a lot more friction between the strands. So find a part that goes to the constrictor. Like this one goes under 2 onto the top of the knot. We don't want this one, we want one next to it. Slide the tool under that one, brace your thumb on top, brace this thumb next to it, and pull against the constrictor. And trace under 2 to the next part. Slide the tool underneath, brace against the knot, and pull up the slack. Trace down under the next 2 to the next part, brace, and pull the slack, nice and firm. Finally up under the last 2 and up in the middle, brace, and pull. This time, leave this last bite loose. We can pull it down at the end. Come straight down, back a couple, that's the next one. Slide under, draw up, and continue for all 4 loops. You can use the tool for 1 or 2 passes, and you should be able to get the knot tight enough. If you need to, you can also use a pair of pliers, preferably duckbill pliers that you have filed any sharp edges off of to pry the slack around the knot. You want it firm, even hard, so that it makes a practical button. Or you can leave it somewhat looser if it's only a decorative button. Work carefully, consistently. Pull each part the same as all the others. Otherwise, you'll end up with a lopsided button. Keep the knot fair and smooth as you work. Finally, pull each bite down onto the surface of the knot. This one looks pretty good. Every piece drawn up as much as every other piece. A regular pattern on this double crown on top, regular pattern on the sides. Now it's time to trim the ends. Best way to do that, take a good sharp knife and rest it on an end right where it comes out of the knot. Instead of moving the knife, which might result in slicing through the loops accidentally, hold it down firmly, and move the rope. Turn and go to the next one. Get up there right close to the knot, press down firmly, and wiggle the rope back and forth. Sharper the knife, the better. Make sure that you have it positioned so that it can't turn on you. If necessary, get a friend to help you hold the button. Lay it down firmly, wiggle the rope. That way the knife stops and doesn't keep slicing right through. Lay it down firmly, wiggle the rope. When you're done, you can trim up any loose yarns that might be left, and you'll have the button. The name of this button, the only name I know of, is Ashley's 880. That's number 880 in the Ashley Book of Knots. It was a variation that Clifford Ashley came up with on the classic wall and crown button construction. And there are many other wall and crown buttons that you can tie by simply manipulating those two basic knots with varying details. You can see this is a nice flat button. It can be tied with 4 strands as we did, or with 3 strands. You can unlay a 3-strand rope and tie this button with those 3 strands in the end of it. Or you can seize a 4th strand on and tie a 4-strand button in a 3-strand rope. It's useful, as I said, for lanyards for opening shackles. It's great for clothing buttons, wool sweaters, jackets, that sort of thing. Or simply as a decorative accent. You might want to glue it onto the corner of picture frames, for instance. Now we're going to do some hitches, a way to cover cylindrical objects like stanchions, steering wheels, tool handles, for a better grip and for a pleasing appearance. Most often you see one strand endlessly half-hitched in a spiral around rails. It's called French hitching. But we're going to do something quite a bit more interesting. It's called ring bolt hitching. You take 3 pieces and constrictor them to the object you're going to hitch. Take any one of those pieces and make a half hitch going away to its own side. The end goes under itself. Pull it snug. Take the piece next to it and hitch in the other direction. Pull it snug. Take the 3rd piece in the original direction. You're just alternating the directions of the hitches. First piece, one side and back. Pull it snug. The bottommost piece is the one you tuck each time. This is the bottommost one now of the 3. It crosses. Pull it snug. Bottom one crosses around under everything. Pull it snug. Bottom one. Pull each one before you pass it in case it's come loose from a previous turn. And then work it right down. Keep the seam straight down the line as you go. Avoid having it tilted over to one side or the other. Bottom one crosses, goes around, up under itself, and snug. Push this little bite and pull on the end. Bottom one goes across, under, and under itself. And snug. It might not look real smooth at the start, but we're going to cover that part up anyway. Just concentrate on getting an even, tight braid along the length of this. If you're covering a wheel, these hitches go on the outside. They take up more space than the turns, so it's easier to cover an arcing object. They push ahead faster than the turns do. But you can also use this to cover straight objects like stanchions and tool handles. And across and back. When you want to cover a great long length of rail, do a sample job with a known length of twine, say about 2 feet for each piece. See how much distance 2 feet will cover. Multiply that length to get your desired total length and find out how much twine you'll need for a specific job. When you're done, once again, tie a constrictor over the ends of the twine and cut them off. Here's another form of 3-strand hitching I call St. Mary's hitching. In this one, each strand gets tucked in the same direction in succession. Start with one here, around, half hitch, and out. The next one, around, half hitch, out, and out. So the first 3 hitches are made. So far, nothing special. But now, take the bottommost one, go over the next 2, around, half hitch, and down. Draw it up snug. Take the new one on the bottom, go over the next 2, around, half hitch, and down. The new bottom one, over, half hitch, and down. The new bottom one. Draw each hitch up firmly, and you'll start to get what looks like 3-strand rope spiraling around on top of a series of turns. Always the bottommost one over the other 2 and under itself. Draw it up nice and snug, bottom, over, and hitch. As with the ring bolt hitching, start with a sample section with twine of a known length. See how far it gets you, and then cut an appropriate length for the project you have in mind. Kind of handsome. St. Mary's hitching. You might recall that I said the constrictor knot was strictly a utility knot. Well, it's not true. You can use this humble knot as a start for the mythical Turk's head, the wonderful endless braid that's handy for things like neckerchief or duty bag slides, as a little bulk at the end of a tool handle, as a grip guard on a paddle or oar. Many, many uses. No knot with a wider range of usefulness. If you tie your constrictor knot, as before, and put it on your hand, it'll look like this. You'll see the overhand knot here with a turn on top. Here is the end going over the top of your hand away from you. Notice that it comes through the knot and points off that way. To make a Turk's head, just bring it down on that side and up under the first part it comes to. You're going to go under here, over the next part, the turn on top of the knot, and under the last part. So the end is coming out, comes up, under the near side of that overhand knot, over the turn, and under the far side, and out. Just arrange that neatly on your hands. You'll see this is a 4-strand braid, 1, 2, 3, 4, with 3 bites, 1, 2, 3. To finish the knot, just bring the end in alongside the standing part and begin doubling and tripling. Just follow in parallel and just keep following wherever the standing part leads. Once again, the Turk's head from the surprising constrictor knot start. Make your constrictor, put it on your hands. This is the end going away from you. It's pointing off that way. Bring it down. Here's the near side of the overhand knot, the turn, and the far side. The end comes up under the near side, over the turn, and under the far side, giving you a 4-lead, these are the leads, the parts of the braid, by 3-bite knot. The bites are the scalloped edges around the periphery of the knot. Once you have the knot tied, just follow the standing part right into the braid. You've finished up here, bring it down, and then just follow right in. You go under where the standing part goes under, and over where it goes over. Just stick right by it. Turn, following this standing part, under and over. All right? Turn the knot on your hands and keep following the same part. Under. Turn again, following this, and keep doubling. Under, over, under, over, under. Be real careful you don't get distracted onto another turn by mistake. Just stay right alongside the original lead. Under, over, and eventually you'll come back to where you started. Under, over, and so. When you do, you'll have make an optical illusion that 2 strands come in and the same 2 strands come out. That's where you cut this end off on this side and this end off here. This knot is doubled. Ordinarily, Turk's heads look best if they're tripled. So you can either take this side and continue the process, tripling, or start with a longer end, be able to take this one along to triple. Here's a finished 4x3 knot, 4 lead, 1, 2, 3, 4, by 3 bites, 1, 2, 3. It's covering the transition between ring bolt hitching and St. Mary's hitching. You could also use it at the end of the hitching, at either end, to cover the constrictors and the ends of those knots. You draw up a Turk's head, as with a button, by starting at one end and gradually working the slack out around the knot, snug, 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 a little at a time, until it's firm and the ends can't pull out by themselves. If you wanted to use it as a neckerchief slide, or a ditty bag slide. Anytime you don't want it super tight, also for a wrist bracelet, you can leave the knot fair but loose and stitch or glue the ends down underneath those two turns. So for instance, here's where the ends cross under these two turns. Cut, and then stitch or glue under here. Alternatively, you can varnish the whole knot. Put it over an object with wax paper under the Turk's head, between the Turk's head and the object. Varnish it as many times as you want. Remove the wax paper, and the Turk's head will hold its shape, and the ends will be glued down by the varnish. The Turk's head from the constrictor knot start is just one of many possible starts for one of many possible Turk's heads. This is a 4x3. You can make a 3x5, a 5x6, almost any combination of leads and bites. And all of them can be expanded into larger Turk's heads, more leads and more bites, by a little known trick which you're about to see. Pretend you're going to double the knot, just like before. You bring the end in alongside the standing part. But this time, you don't just stay right next to it. You jump over and follow it along on the other side. And the reason is that you're trying to stay alongside it, but between it and this part. And what is this part? It's where you were just before you finished the knot. This is the previous turn you made before you started doubling. When you want to expand a knot, you want to stay next to your previous turn. So come in, double the knot. When you go up, here's your previous part. So you jump over to stay between it and the standing part. So you're working under where the standing part goes under, and you're working opposite of the previous turn. Parallel to this one, opposite this one. Where this goes over, you go under. Where this goes under, you go under. And you stay between the two of them. So keep going. Turn the knot. Here's your previous part. It goes under here. You go over. So does the standing part. And along the bottom, you finally make it go under, where the standing part goes under. Having done that, turn your hand back over, and you're back at the beginning. But this time, you have a series of bars. You see, this part goes over two. Before, we had a regular over one, under one weave. But now in this section, this goes over two. This down here goes under two. This goes under two. And this goes over two. So we've gone around once, parallel to the standing part, opposite the previous turn. And what that's accomplished is to create an irregular braid from a regular one. Before, each part went over, under, over in a regular sequence. But now, in the places we've been, there's an irregular weave with each part going under two, over two, under two, over two. The idea is to create this irregularity and then split it right down the middle, going from two, over two, under two, two, over one, under one. Right down the middle, going under the ones that go under, over the ones that go over. This one went under, you go under it. So first you create an under two, over two braid, and then you come right back down the middle and make it under one, over one again. But this time it's larger and more complex. It's called splitting the lead. That's the first half of our pass. Turn the knot over, and you'll find another series of bars going under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. Again, take your end, go under the one that goes under, over the one that goes over, and so on, right across the knot. Splitting the lead on the back as well. Take up the slack. And now we have another Turk's head, grown out, expanded from the original constrictor knot start. Instead of 4 leads and 3 bites, we have 6 leads and 5 bites. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you wanted to, you could repeat the process and get an even larger knot, following along parallel to the standing part and opposite to the previous lead, which in this case would be right here. So you come in between them and do the same thing again. Or if you like a knot of this size and proportion, just start doubling and tripling as before, keeping the end parallel to the standing part, not jumping over like you did before, all the way around. And so on. And a finished knot of this dimension, 6 leads and 5 bites, looks like this. Handsome big thing, isn't it? At this point, if you've made it on your hand, you can place it onto an object. If you have an application like a ship's wheel or a stanchion where you can't slide it onto the end, you'll need to make it in place around the object. This knot is, again, doubled, but you can get a fuller looking knot if you triple the entire knot. Just keep following this along one more time around everywhere. You get a nice full tripled knot. A little detail. Notice how this part here is just under these parts here. In the finished knot, you would cut it there and cut the other end there, so they are both under the same turn. But if you do that, it's very easy to pull this out. If it got snagged, that end would just pop out and the knot could come apart. So it's always good with this or any other Turk's head to take that vulnerable end a little further into the knot. Under an extra pair of turns, and then back this other end up to match it. Now, it'll take a lot more to pull it out because it's bound by these parts as well as these. You would trim the knot here. It'll simulate trimming by just pulling that end down out of the way. So it's gone. And here. So you get the illusion of these two parts going in and continuing on over here. As I said at the beginning, the field of fancy rope work is huge. There are hundreds and hundreds of button knots alone, at least as many different kinds of Turk's heads, and new ones being invented and added to the vocabulary all the time. But no matter how involved you get in the subject, no matter what level of proficiency you reach, please remember that you want to make your work fancy, but you also want to make it useful, and to remember to have all the parts of it balanced and pleasing in appearance, like any other work of art.